You think when you raise a child alone through job losses, heartbreaks, fevers, school plays, and late-night tears, that they'll remember, that they'll say thank you at least once. You never imagine that child will one day look at you like you're a burden, or worse, push you into a lake and laugh. This isn't just another revenge story. This is about a woman who gave everything and watched it be erased. I used to tell myself I was lucky that I had a job that paid the bills, lucky that my son Darren grew up without getting into drugs or jail, lucky that I had a roof over our heads, even if the walls were thin and the heater coughed through winter like an old man with pneumonia. But now, I wonder if calling it luck was just how I avoided admitting the truth. I gave up everything and nobody noticed. Darren was only 4 when his father left. Not a fight, not even a note. Just a paycheck that stopped showing up and a silence that grew heavier every night. I was 29, working double shifts as a nurse at the county hospital. I came home to a tired body and a little boy with wide eyes and skinned knee asking if Daddy was coming home yet. I told him stories, told him Daddy was working somewhere far, told him I was strong enough for both of us. And for a while, I believed that. Over the years, I did what every mother does without applause. I packed lunches at 5 a.m. I ironed shirts for first dates I didn't approve of. I sewed Halloween costumes out of old curtains. I skipped vacations to pay for braces and soccer camp and that terrible electric keyboard he never learned to play. And when I finally saved enough, $8 at a time, $20 from birthday tips, tax returns I didn't touch, I bought this house by the lake. A dream. Not just for me, for us. Someday, I told Darren, this will be yours. He smiled, hugged me, and said, "You're the best mom ever." That's the thing about kids. When they're small, their love feels eternal. But when they grow up, they forget how many nights you stayed awake holding them, through fevers, heartbreaks, or just thunder outside the window. When Darren turned 24, he married Casey. She was polished, always smelled like expensive shampoo, and never really looked me in the eye. They lost their apartment after Darren got laid off, again, and I didn't hesitate. I said, "Move in, stay here as long as you need." And they did. A few weeks turned into months. They brought their son, little Tyler, who filled the house with the kind of giggles I hadn't heard in years. I made pancakes every Saturday, just like I did for Darren when he was small. I stocked the fridge, paid the electric bill, and bought Tyler's school supplies when they said things were tight. And no one said thank you. They acted like this was expected. When I turned 70, I quietly took a portion of my pension and put it into a college fund for Tyler. $60,000 across 12 years. Birthday money, bonuses, overtime hours I picked up when my legs were screaming, because I wanted that boy to have a shot, just like I gave Darren. I even drafted a will. It said in neat blue ink, "The lake house will go to Darren and his family should I pass. The college fund will transfer to Tyler upon enrollment." Simple, honest, fair. But something shifted over the last year. Darren stopped calling me mom. He started calling me her, even when I was standing in the room. Casey told friends at her wine night that I was a bit slow lately. She reorganized my pantry, moved my teacups, locked me out of my own Wi-Fi, and laughed when I asked for help. Tyler began rolling his eyes when I told stories. He mocked my voice, the way I stirred my tea, and Darren just, let him. Sometimes, I would sit at the kitchen table while they laughed in the living room, loud and full of jokes. None of them ever included me. I thought it was a phase, until that barbecue. You probably want to hear about the lake. That moment when I was standing on the dock and Darren turned to me and said, "Come on, Mom, let's see if you still float." And then, his hand on my back. A shove. Cold. Deliberate. But we're not there yet, because before he pushed me into that lake, I pushed myself to the edge for 45 years. And not once did he ask if I could swim. Let's keep going. Because this story doesn't end in water. It begins with a woman drying herself off and finally realizing she never had to drown to be loved. Not again. Not ever. The lake wasn't warm that day. It was early spring. Michigan kind of spring, where the sun is only pretending and the water still holds the memory of February. But I hadn't planned on swimming. I'd just finished slicing watermelon in the kitchen and brought it out on a tray. Darren was by the grill holding a beer, surrounded by two of his friends I barely knew. Tyler was on his phone. Casey was inside, laughing about some trip to Miami she was planning with people from her yoga class. It was one of those days that felt too quiet for how loud the tension was under the surface. I should have felt happy. I was with family, right? But I'd started feeling like an outsider in my own house, like a guest who had overstayed her welcome in a place she paid for. Darren called out, "Mom, come out on the dock. Tyler wants to see if you can still do that dive you used to do." I remember blinking, confused. That dive? I hadn't jumped into water since before my shoulder surgery. He knew that. He signed the forms. He sat in the waiting room. But I walked out anyway, tray in hand, trying to smile. Old habits, trying to keep the peace. "Come on, you used to be a fish, remember?" he said, smirking. "Let's see if you still float." Before I could even answer, before I could say, "No, Darren, I can't, not anymore," his hand was on my back. One shove. Hard, cold. No laughter yet. Just the sound of water. Then the cold. So cold it shocked the air from my lungs. Have you ever had the kind of cold that makes your heart forget how to beat right? I went under like a stone. My limbs didn't work right, my chest burned, my shoulders screamed in pain. When I surfaced, gasping, coughing, choking, the first thing I heard wasn't concern. It wasn't someone shouting my name or reaching to help. It was laughter, real laughter, from Darren, from Tyler. And then, "She's being dramatic," Casey muttered from her folding chair, sipping wine like it was a soap opera, and I was just part of the background noise. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had someone laugh while you were drowning? Not just in water, but in life. You give and give and give. And then one day, they don't just forget what you did. They mock it, dismiss it, call it overreaction. If that's happened to you even once, you'll know what I mean when I say it's not the water that breaks you. It's the sound of their laughter when you come up for air. I don't remember getting out. I think my body took over. Old instincts, the last reserves of adrenaline. My knees scraped on the wooden dock as I pulled myself up. My cardigan stuck to my back. My heart thudded like a drum against my ribs. No one helped me. Not one of them moved. Darren was still holding his beer, looking down at me with that half smirk he got from his father. "Guess you still got it," he said. "Tough old bird." Tyler laughed. They all did. Then they just turned back to their drinks. Someone opened another bag of chips. Casey poured more wine, like I hadn't almost died right in front of them, like I hadn't raised that boy. I walked, soaking and silent, back toward the house. I could hear the grill sizzling. I could hear Tyler complaining about the Wi-Fi signal. I could hear them living their lives, without me in it. That's when the clarity hit me. Not like a bolt of lightning, but like a slow, creeping warmth behind my ribs. I wasn't a mother anymore. Not to Darren, not really. To him, I was housing, convenience, babysitting when needed, maybe a possible future payout if I died at the right time. I sat in the kitchen, dripping onto the floor, staring at the back door. No one came in, no one brought a towel, no one asked if I was okay. I thought about all the nights I stayed up with Darren when he had asthma, reading to him in a rocking chair until he fell asleep. I thought about the time I worked 11 days straight to afford his soccer camp. I thought about the day I signed the title over to the lake house and told him, "Someday, this will be yours." And then I thought, was this what I raised? I won't lie. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw every dish in the sink and make them look at me. But another part of me, a deeper, quieter part, just broke. In a clean, quiet way. I wiped the water off my face with a guest towel, the one I'd kept folded under the sink for company, the one nobody else ever touched. I looked in the hallway mirror. My eyes were red, my skin pale, my hair wet and stringy. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. And yet, I'd never seen myself more clearly. Later that night, after the house had gone still, I wrote one sentence in my journal. They laughed while I drowned. I'm not going to drown again, saying. Pause here. If you're watching this and thinking, that's awful. I'd never let that happen to my mother. Ask yourself, when was the last time you checked if your mom was okay? Not out of obligation, but out of love. Because silence isn't always peace. And people don't just disappear. They fade after too many times being overlooked. The house smelled like grilled meat and spilled wine. Laughter floated in from the back patio, sharp, effortless, like they hadn't seen anything unusual that afternoon. Like I hadn't just pulled myself out of a lake, knees bleeding, chest tight, water still dripping from my sleeves. I walked inside alone. No one noticed. I was drenched, cold, and trembling, but the only sounds were the clink of glasses, someone popping open a second bottle of Chardonnay, and Tyler arguing about Airbnb listings. I might as well have been invisible. I stood for a moment in the hallway, leaving small, wet footprints on the hardwood floor. Then I turned toward the guest bathroom, not wanting to track water into the kitchen, not wanting to disturb whatever fun was still happening. I used an old towel I'd kept for years, the kind people forget exists until they need it, like me. My cardigan clung to my back and my shoulder ached from the fall. I looked in the mirror again and saw a stranger, someone ghostly. But here's the strange part. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't even sigh. I just accepted it. I went back to the kitchen and sat down at the edge of the table, the same table where I'd once helped Darren build his third-grade science project, where I'd rolled dough for Christmas pies, where I'd sewn patches onto Tyler's school pants. Now I was just taking up space. No one offered me a blanket. No one looked me in the eye. No one acknowledged that I'd almost drowned in front of them. Casey glanced at me once and said, "There's water on the floor, just so you know." Then she went back to scrolling through resort photos. That night, I didn't sleep in my room. I sat in the den, the one Darren converted into his office, even though I was the one who paid for the desk and chair. He never used it, but insisted on taking it over. I sat on the old couch and pulled the blanket over my legs. From down the hall, I could hear voices, not angry ones, just casual. "She's getting worse," Darren said. "She was mumbling earlier. I think she forgot where the sugar was." "You're just now noticing?" Casey replied, her voice low, sarcastic. "She's halfway gone already. Might as well start making plans before it's too late." The next morning I made breakfast. Yes, I know, it sounds strange. After all that, why would I still be cooking for them? But it wasn't for them. Not anymore. It was habit. It was muscle memory. And it was the last time. They came into the kitchen like nothing had happened. Tyler asked if we had almond milk. Darren complained about the bacon being too crisp. No one said, "Are you okay?" No one said, "What happened yesterday wasn't right." And that was when I knew. They hadn't just crossed a line. They'd erased it. Later that week, I overheard Casey on the phone with her sister. She was walking through the living room like I wasn't even there. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up. She's not contributing anymore. She just sits. I mean, we're doing everything." I sat with that sentence like it was a bad piece of meat stuck in my teeth. She's not contributing anymore. Never mind that I paid for their groceries. Never mind that I bought the car Darren drove. Never mind that Tyler's school fund still bore my name. They had already rewritten the story. I was a burden now, an obligation, a space filler in the house I built. One afternoon, I went into the laundry room and found my favorite cardigan, soft blue, worn at the cuffs, folded neatly on top of the dryer. It smelled like bleach. Casey had accidentally washed it with the cleaning rags. "Sorry," she said with a shrug. "Guess it's time to let that old thing go, anyway." I wanted to scream, not because of the cardigan, but because of what it meant. Nothing I valued mattered here. Not my clothes, not my effort, not my pain, not even my presence. The hardest part? It wasn't anger. It was the slow realization that I had become background noise in my own life. Have you ever had that feeling? Where you're in the middle of the room and still feel like a shadow? Like the only time someone looks at you is when they need something moved? I didn't want revenge. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted dignity. But dignity only exists when others allow you to have it, or when you take it back yourself. A few days later, I walked past Darren and Casey in the kitchen. They didn't stop talking. I heard the word facility. I heard early onset. I heard, we'll say, she agreed. And that was the moment I stopped calling it a home. That night, I opened the drawer beside my bed. Inside was a small leather journal I hadn't touched in years. I turned to a blank page and wrote, "They don't see me anymore. And maybe they don't deserve to." The next morning, I put on fresh clothes. I made myself a cup of tea, just for me. No extras, no trays, no plates for others. And I sat in the sunroom looking out at the lake. It was quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind of silence that follows a goodbye that hasn't been spoken yet. I don't know what exactly broke the spell. Maybe it was the sound of Casey's voice in the next room saying, "She's barely even functioning anymore." Or maybe it was when I opened the fridge that morning and saw that the lemonade I made, the one I've made every week for 20 years, had been poured into a plastic pitcher and relabeled with Casey's name on it for a brunch she was hosting. Not a thank you, not even a mention, just claimed, like I no longer existed. I sat on the back porch that afternoon, holding the chipped mug I've had since Darren was in middle school. The lake was calm, almost too calm, like it was pretending nothing ever happened, but I remembered. My body still remembered the cold, the panic, the silence, and I realized something I never wanted to admit before. They were waiting, not for me to speak up, not for me to heal. They were waiting for me to get older, slower, weaker, until they could move me out like a broken lamp no one wants, but no one throws away. That night, I called Irene. I hadn't said much to her in weeks, partly because I was embarrassed, partly because I didn't want to explain what I didn't fully understand yet. She didn't answer with hello. She said, "What did they do this time?" Just like that, like she already knew. I told her everything, about the push, the laughter, the silence, the whispers behind closed doors. She didn't gasp or say, "Oh, honey." She just said, "Then it's time." Time for what? I asked, even though I already knew. She showed up the next morning with a manila folder and a cup of strong black coffee, like she was preparing me for battle. "Your lawyer's card," she said, tapping the folder. "Peter Holloway. You told me about him last year when we did your taxes." "You kept that?" I asked. "I keep everything, especially when my best friend's living with wolves." I laughed, just a little, a small sound, but it cracked something open. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't confused. I was awake. I looked at Irene and said quietly, "I don't want revenge." "I know," she said. "You want release." And that's exactly what I wanted. Not retribution, not confrontation, freedom. Later that day, I pulled down the binder Cliff and I had put together after his first stroke. It had everything: account numbers, the deed to the house, the trust paperwork we never finished updating. I flipped through page after page, pausing on little sticky notes in Cliff's handwriting. "Ask Margaret about the scholarship fund. Check if Helen wants to keep this as a joint account." He trusted me to carry on. I had, but I'd also let myself get buried underneath everyone else's comfort. That night, I sat at the same kitchen table where no one talked to me anymore. I opened a blank page in my journal and wrote at the top, "What do I still control?" I made a list: the deed to the house, the education fund for Tyler, my pension accounts, the will, and then I added another line underneath, and my silence. Because silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's a strategy. The next day, I made an appointment with Peter. He remembered me instantly, said I was Cliff's Helen. I nodded. He listened carefully. Too carefully. His brows lifted at certain parts of the story, but he didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "Well, the good news is you're in full control and you're doing this while you're still sharp. That makes all the difference." He walked me through every option: updating the will, transferring ownership of the house to a charitable trust, reallocating Tyler's fund. "I don't want to cut them off right away," I said. "Not yet." Peter paused. "That's generous. I smiled. I want to give them one last opportunity to prove who they are when they think I'm still theirs to inherit. That night, I drafted a letter. Not long, not emotional, just a few sentences. If in the next 7 days you have something honest to say to me, something that has nothing to do with the house or the money or what you think you're owed, I'll listen. If not, then I'll take that silence as your answer. I left it on the counter, right next to the bowl of fruit I'd bought with my own money. And then I waited. Day 1, nothing. Day 2, Tyler asked if I was going to the store, didn't look up from his phone. Day 3, Casey said I'd forgotten to vacuum. Day 4, Darren grunted in my direction. Day 5, a new pizza box appeared on the table. No one offered me a slice. Day 6, I heard them talking about that new beach house down in Florida. Day 7, silence. That night, I walked back into my bedroom, closed the door gently, and sat down at the desk Cliff built. I took out the folder Peter gave me, and I signed everything. No anger, no sadness, just clarity. They had a chance, and they chose silence. The sky was overcast, not stormy, just that heavy kind of gray that feels honest, like the clouds are holding something they'll never explain. Peter slid the documents across the desk, and I signed each one carefully. No hesitation, no trembling hand, just ink and peace. The deed to the house, transferred. The university fund, redirected. My will, updated. No more Darren, no more Casey, no more Tyler. I left nothing out of anger, just removal, like pulling weeds. You don't scream at them, you just decide they don't belong anymore. When I left Peter's office, Irene was waiting in her car, engine running. She handed me a paper bag with 2 croissants and said, "You did it." "I did," I whispered, as if I had to say it aloud to believe it. I didn't cry. Not even when we sat in the cafe afterward and I sipped my tea slowly, the weight of years lifting from my spine like fog. "You ready to disappear?" Irene asked. "I'm not disappearing," I said. "I'm relocating." I didn't pack a lot. A suitcase, 3 sweaters, a photo of Cliff and me in front of the house before it became a place filled with unfamiliar laughter, and 1 photo of Darren as a boy, smiling, missing his 2 front teeth, arms wrapped around my neck. Not to carry guilt, but to remind myself that boy once existed, but he's not the man standing in my kitchen anymore. That Friday evening, I made dinner like I always had, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved to leave without bitterness. Pasta, garlic bread, salad, my usual end-of-week meal. I placed everything neatly on the table and quietly said, "I'll be going out of town with Irene this weekend." No one asked where. No one asked why. Casey said, "That's nice," while folding laundry. Tyler didn't look up from his phone. And Darren? He mumbled something about, "Don't forget to lock the back door." That was it. The suitcase sat by the door all night. I caught each of them glancing at it, just for a second, but no one offered to carry it. No one asked when I'd be back. And for the first time, though, I was okay with that, because I knew something they didn't. They weren't being abandoned. They were being left behind. Saturday morning, 5:30 a.m. The house was silent. I moved like a ghost. Folded the blanket on my bed, wiped down the bathroom sink, left the fridge organized and full. Not because I had to, because that's who I am. At 6:12 a.m. sharp, Irene pulled up in her old sedan. She honked once, quick and soft. I stood in the hallway for one last look. This house, this beautiful, quiet, weaponized place, had held so many of my memories hostage, but not anymore. I stepped outside, suitcase in hand, and closed the door behind me as softly as a final breath. We drove through town in silence, past the grocery store where I used to buy Darren's favorite cereal, past the school where I dropped off Tyler that first year, past the pharmacy where I once filled prescriptions for everyone in that house but myself. I had poured myself out in teaspoons for them, and now I was full again. Silver Pines was smaller than I expected, but peaceful. There were flowers blooming out front. A woman walking her dog. a small wooden bench under a tree that reminded me of the one Cliff and I used to sit on in our early retirement years. The manager, a soft-voiced woman named Beverly, welcomed me with no questions. "Room's ready," she said. "You'll find tea in the cabinet and the heater's already set to low. It runs warm." No one asked me what happened. No one asked if I was running away. Just, "Welcome home." My room was simple. Bed by the window, a chair, a desk, a bookshelf that I immediately filled with the stories I'd written for no one but myself, a small drawer now holding my journal, and silence. Not the sharp, cutting silence of that house I left behind, but a silence I chose. That afternoon, I sat by the window with my tea and wrote, "Today I am not waiting to be acknowledged. I am not hoping to be seen. Today, I have seen myself. And that is enough." Back in the house I left, I imagine they found my room eventually. Saw the drawers empty, the closet bare, the final meal uneaten in the fridge, and maybe, just maybe, they wondered where I'd gone. But I doubt it. Because when people expect you to be furniture, useful, unmoving, always there, they never notice the moment you walk away. I don't know what the hell say when they finally realize the inheritance is gone. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But I won't be there to hear it. Because this isn't about them anymore. This is about me, my life, my terms, and for the first time, in a very, very long time, I am not afraid of being alone. I am afraid of being used. And I refuse to go back to that. They didn't even notice I was gone until the towels ran out. No clean plates in the cupboard, no fresh lemonade in the fridge, no quiet footsteps sweeping the floor before sunrise. Just silence. And eventually, that silence turned into panic. Peter told me about the first email. Darren sent it 3 days after I left. Subject line, "Mom, where are you?" It was full of broken sentences, half apologies, and a string of confused questions. "We didn't know you were upset. You could have told us. Tyler misses you." Peter asked if I wanted him to respond. I said no. Let them sit with the silence. Let it echo. The inheritance notice arrived 2 weeks later. Peter called them into his office, Darren, Casey, and Tyler. They came expecting clarification, maybe some reassurance that I was just having a moment. Instead, they got facts. Margaret Porter has restructured all assets. There will be no inheritance for anyone listed here. The home has been transferred to a foundation for single mothers. The education fund was donated to a first-generation scholarship program, and all remaining financial matters will be handled by my office. Margaret has chosen peace. That peace does not include you. Peter said Darren tried to argue. Casey went pale. Tyler called me selfish. But nothing changed. Because I wasn't there to be convinced. And for once, I didn't owe them an explanation. Meanwhile, at Silver Pines, I was drinking tea on my small balcony. A soft breeze rustled through the trees. I watched 2 sparrows squabble over a flower pot. A neighbor walked by with a potted tomato plant, nodding hello like we'd been friends forever. Peace doesn't arrive with applause. It slips in quietly, when you stop asking to be included and start choosing where your presence belongs. 1 week later, I got a letter from the foundation. They'd received the full amount. They were thrilled, and they included a list of names, students who would be applying that fall, their stories tucked inside neat little profiles. I read them all. One of them wrote, "I'm applying because I want to build machines that help people breathe." I smiled. That's what Darren once said, back when he still had dreams that made him kind. I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just felt right. And back in that house by the lake, they were finally starting to understand something. It wasn't the money they lost. It was me. Not the maid, not the cook, not the soft-spoken woman in the corner. Me, the soul of the house. And when I left, they heard it. Now, when I walk the garden path behind Silver Pines, I walk like someone who owns every step. I plant seeds. I water quietly. I sip coffee with people who say please and thank you and don't expect anything in return. Sometimes I still think of Darren as a little boy, but only sometimes, because now I don't live in memory. I live in freedom. And maybe you, listening right now, maybe you've walked that same quiet path I did. You gave and gave and gave meals, time, kindness, believing that one day someone would stop and truly see you. You waited for appreciation, for recognition, for a simple, heartfelt thank you. But what if it never comes? And more importantly, what if you stop needing it? What would your life look like if you chose yourself before anyone else finally did? If this story touched something deep in you, I invite you to share a comment, not for me, but for the version of you that's still learning. She doesn't have to be silent to be whole.